Of course. And we're taking a look. We're doing chapter 8. And as of last week, and now we're going to be on to chapter 9. But, you know, chapter 8 and chapter 9, you could almost put parentheses around it and say that they're dealing with the same kind of thing. Because they really are dealing with the same kind of thing. And really what it boils down to is, how do we treat people? And that's kind of a broad, all-encompassing thing to think about. But the way that Jesus treated people was not the same way that the leadership at the time in Israel treated people. In fact, you really couldn't be on more polar opposite planes, and both of them would have claimed to say that the law was their basis for what they did. Except that when you look at the law in the spirit of it, and in what it really was meant to do, you come out of it looking and treating people like Jesus did. If you look at the law, just every letter of it, every sentence of it, and only that at all, then you come out of it looking like what the leadership did. And what we see is that looking at the law, two completely different ways, we see this come out in John chapter 8 and chapter 9. How are they going to treat people? How does Jesus treat people? How does the leadership treat people? Well, we know that if we want to review really quick chapter 8, verse 1. Of course, Jesus is preaching in the temple, and we see that Pharisees and Sadducees, or not Sadducees, but the Pharisees and the scribes come and bring to him that woman that was caught in adultery. And something occurred to me as I was rereading this is that they're saying that according to the law that she should be stoned, she should be killed, according to the law. And what they forgot about the law was that the law, really, if you boil it all down, was about mercy, was about love, and it was about truth. What's the truth? The truth is that nobody could keep the law. And so these men, although being commanded to, yes, that was what the commandment said, is that she has to die because of the sin. But hidden inside the law and in between its lines is a thread of mercy, is a thread of truth, is a thread of love. And that's exactly what they were missing. So that's why when Jesus stood up and said, he who was without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. You could almost say, the same law that you're condemning her by to death, by committing sin, is the same law that you conveniently forgot about that condemns you to death too. And that's what Jesus came to demonstrate, is that when we want to look at the faults of other people and then not look at our own faults, that's where we get in trouble. And so what we see is that Jesus came to bring them back to what the spirit of the law was, and not just the letter of the law. They had the letter of the law down, but what they needed was that spirit of the law. And so what we see is that that's why he was able to disperse the angry mob that day. It's because he reminded them that same law that you're bringing this woman here to me for is the same law that condemns you. You just forgot about that. That's why he said, throw a stone at her first if you're without sin. And of course, then they realized, well, I guess we're all under the same law. You know what trumps that? It's mercy. That's what trumps anything, is mercy. So we have to remember that in dealing with people, and it's hard to do because we have preconceived ideas, we have hang-ups, let's face it. But what trumps those other things that would make us pick up a stone and throw is mercy. And that's really what the law came to show man, is that here's exactly what you would have to do to be perfect. Now no one's going to be able to do it. See, because before that, there was really no law that was written down. There was nothing to say that this is what your country should abide by, this is right, this is wrong. The law came to expose all that. And it did a good job of that. It also showed that man was unable to keep it. And so the thread that we see through the Bible, and that's the reason we see a harlot in the line of Jesus. That's why we see a Gentile has no business being in the line of Jesus. That's why we see David forgiven of murder, of adultery himself. We see this thread of forgiveness all throughout the Bible. We see it starting with Adam and Eve when they first sinned, and they were forgiven right away. God, he was the one that killed the animal and clothed them. And so we see that this thread of mercy has always been there, and it will always be there. It's like the special last week from Sister Judy and Sister Julie, Hannah. only thing there that's going to be is scars in the kingdom, the scars that's made by man in the hands of Jesus. That's it. And that's to remind us and himself that he willingly died for us, and he gave us his mercy. He had mercy on us. And so he's not wiping away those images of his hands. Because remember when he met with, after he was already raised from the dead, and had a new body, he told Thomas to put his hands in his hands where they had pierced him. So that was a very real thing. And so I think that song is true. Jesus looks like that still, and will always look like that for our sake. And so chapter 8 really deals with this woman who was brought to him, and then of course he goes on to have some more battles with the Pharisees, and really a lot of battles there. When he says that Satan was their father, of course he means that, figuratively, of course, but the fact that, and really you could boil it all down to, they're rejecting Jesus because they've already rejected God. And had they really been following God in the things where they have gone astray, they would just embrace Jesus and say, yes, this makes sense. This is what I want. But because they were off on that, they were off on who Jesus was. So we're going to get a huge another dose of that today in what I consider to be 8 and 9, the parenthetical chapters. So chapter 9, verse 1 says, now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. I need you to pay attention here, because I didn't pay attention the first time. And I want you to catch this. Let's see if you catch this. He was blind from birth. Okay? And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned that this man or his parents that he was born blind? Did it strike you as weird?
The blindness is a sin, you mean?
Yeah.
Or is something?
The blindness is a consequence of
Sin.
his sin. He was born blind as a baby. When would he supposedly have sinned to have been born blind? Did you ever think about that? It didn't dawn on me the first time I read that. But I think this is a product of the Jewish leadership pounding into them that everything bad that has happened to you is because of your sin. I really do.
That mentality still today, though.
Absolutely. It totally is. And we need to remove ourselves from that mentality that bad things happen because of problems or because of sin. If we would have been back in Job's day, those 3 friends that came to him, they were there for 7 days, the first 7 days, and they didn't say a word. They sat with him on the ground, probably had some sort of fire or something. Nobody talked for 7 days. Those were the best 7 days. And then Job opens his mouth and starts saying that, he's cursing the day he was born, and he has this heavy, heavy, heavy heart. And he's just, and what they don't hear out of his mouth was, why aren't you sorry for your sin? You go back and read chapter 1 and 2. Tell me if Job sinned to deserve what he did. He lost his family, his 10 kids. He lost his house. He lost his livelihood. He lost his servants. He lost his health. We're talking about a man who was righteous, and God allowed those things to happen. So I don't think that we can equate a person with a problem situation to that they sinned. We don't know. And that's the thing, is Job's friends crossed the line that when they said, well, wait a minute, if you just admit your sin, everything will be okay, Job. But he didn't sin. He didn't do that. That wasn't what he did. Have something, Julie?
I knew somebody that I witnessed to for a long time that they thought that they would merit the grace of God. And I think that's one of the delusions that Satan sends on the world, that, if I'm good, then I'm accepted and I'm going to be okay and I'm going to heaven.
Right.
But it also works in the opposite too. I'm not good enough. I can't do it.
Right.
Where we know that, as soon as we accept the fact that we're sinners, there's nothing we can do about it. We have to accept the grace. Then, what's the old saying? You have to get them lost before you can get them saved.
Exactly. Yeah.
As soon as they realize it's not merit.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that I think this teaching was so prevalent that they would even go as far as to say that this man, before he was even born, could have been responsible somehow for sin. It didn't dawn on me that that wasn't well, what did his parents do? Well, that makes a little more sense, but the fact that they're asking about him, that doesn't make any sense. So I'm just saying that it's so pounded into them from the teachers and the leaders that they would even consider that. So Jesus answered, and this is, he nails it on the head here. It says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I just scratched my head on that one too. Because what he's saying is that there wasn't any fault, there wasn't any sin of the man, it wasn't any sin of the parents. He was born blind so that on that very moment, that day, Jesus can heal him. Now that makes me scratch my head. What we consider to be an infirmity, a handicap, that this man couldn't see, an inconvenience to say the least, Jesus is saying that's why he was born blind. He allowed that to happen. He knew that would happen. He allowed it to happen. So what we consider this man to have as a handicap and a detriment, we can flip that around and say, he has a whole chapter dedicated to the Bible that demonstrates his faith. That's what he has. We look at what he didn't have, what he doesn't have, or what I should say he didn't have up until that day. But what he does have is an entire chapter dedicated to, in the Bible, walking and talking with Jesus. And that's something that will never be taken away from him. And so, I don't look at it as a handicap. But how many different things does God bring on us and allow us to go through that we would consider this as a detriment or a handicap, when really it's for his glory and it's for the benefit of others too. And so he says, verse 4, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. So he's saying while he's still on the earth, he still has a chance to heal people and to try to right some wrongs. He's going to do that. So he says, as long as I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And so, did that light ever leave? No. It was transferred from Jesus to the church, but the light hasn't left. So he says, when he had said these things, he spit on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And immediately the man saw. Did Jesus say, you're saved today? You don't have to do anything. I took care of it for you. No. He calls us. He says, I'm convicting you. You're under conviction. We've all felt that. Now I need you to do your part. I need you to respond to me. Because this isn't, I'm not just gonna do everything for you. You have to have some skin in the game. You have to demonstrate your faith. So we can't just expect Christ to do everything. And so had he just healed that man's eyes right then and there, which he's capable of doing, and he did sometimes, but he wanted to test this man's faith. And so he healed him, or I should say he touched his eyes with this clay, and then he gave him a commandment to test his faith. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed, and he came back seeing. I mean, this blind man who had been sitting there begging, with his hand out, he was looking, what's he looking for? I told the kids the story once. I was on a trip for the bank over in Bozeman, and Boston had gone to this really good pizza shop. And I had extra pizza. Okay, nothing wrong with it. Really good. Blue Moon Cafe, I think is what it's called, in Big Sky. So we were coming back. We're about ready to get on the interstate. And I see this guy standing there, right, the interstate. He's a homeless guy. And his son, it's not the why lie, I need beer thing. It's not that. It said, anything helps. Anything helps. This beggar could have said, anything helps. And then when somebody came by and just, patted him on the back, and I didn't hear any cling. I want to hear some money going into that jar. Or I want something else. But he didn't do that day. And when this guy said anything helps, I rolled down my window and I had some extra pizza and I offered it to him. I don't want that. Well, anything helps except pizza. No, he's not really sincere. I wasn't testing him, but in a way you could look at it. I was testing him. Did anything help? No, apparently not. But I look at that and I think, what about this blind man? Here he didn't hear cling cling. He didn't feel a piece of warm food or bread go into his hand. But he was told a very bizarre thing to do is to spit on the ground and make clay and put it on your eyes. And then what? Go and wash? What? I just wanted some money. I just wanted some food. That's why I'm begging. No, he's testing the man's faith. And that man that day had faith to believe Jesus. And that's why he got up, maybe had to be led down to the pool, who knows. But he got up, took the effort in faith, and he went down to that pool and he washed like he was instructed to do. You don't do that if you don't have faith in the person telling you. You have to have faith to do that. And so what we see is that man had faith. And so when he said go wash in the pool, he did it. So he went and washed and came back and seen. The miracle is now complete. Jesus could have just snapped his fingers and it could have been done. But it's not the way he works. He wants us to demonstrate our faith on our side too. So, therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind, said, "Is not this he who sat and begged?" Well, of course it is. They recognize him. Just because he can see doesn't mean he changed his looks or his clothes. Of course it is. Just not used to him being able to walk around and not bump into things, right? Some said, "This is he." They confirmed it. You bet. Others said, "He looks like him, smells like him, dresses like him, but it's not really him." Why? Some people don't want to believe in miracles. Some people don't want to believe in that. And so when the evidence is so out there and so prevalent, like creation, you have to start making up stories that sound really, really dumb. And then you believe it, because ultimately you don't want to believe the truth. Even though the truth is so in your face that it's very obvious. If you don't want to believe it, you're going to make excuses for it, like, he's like him. And he said, "Guys, let's just cut this out." He said, "I am he. I'm who you're thinking that I am. I'm that guy that was begging." So they said to him, "Well, how were your eyes open? We want to know. And he answered and said, "A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to the pool of Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed and I received sight." It really was that easy. Now, the reason I'm making a point to saying it's really that cut and dry, he woke up that morning, couldn't see, and now he can see. He's happy about this. He's excited. He's elated. And now he has people already casting doubt on this miracle, casting doubt on if it really was him. Pretty soon you'll see they're doubting if he was even born blind. You just out there, I was watching this one, 60 Minutes or 2020 or something, and this guy's respectable job at 8 to 5 in a nice, dress clothes and all that. Then he goes in his neighborhood, he starts begging. He made tons of money doing that. They said he made 20 grand a year begging from people, doing the whole like washing your window thing, And it's funny, it's a story of a story. I went to, actually I got home on Friday and this lady was, she was selling that cleaning stuff, you squirt, yeah, okay. I saw her in the neighborhood, I thought, she's coming over here, I bet. So anyway, she did. But she had all these one-liners, and she was ready for me, just baiting me into saying, "No thank you." She wanted it. It was never in her mind that I wasn't going to say that, okay? She was so prepared for it. And so I said, no thank you. Well, for the next 10 plus minutes, she's got me hooked. But she's from Detroit. She said, "Don't ever visit there, by the way." But she's from Detroit. And she makes some jokes, like she got this like out of her little pouch thing, she grabbed one of the kids' shoes and she squirts some stuff in it. Grabs like a little toothbrush looking thing. She's like, yeah, it's an ex-boyfriend, I don't like him, so, you know, it's his toothbrush, you know, just like little jokes like that, but I'm telling you, she didn't want to take no for an answer, and that she would not take no for an answer. And then finally she asked me, she said, well, she goes, do you go to the movies or do you just download stuff off the internet legally? I go to the movies, I don't download. She goes, well then why wouldn't you want to pay for my entertainment?
Okay.
So,
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
okay, well, and then she just kind of wandered away, so.
Yeah.
That was like one of the last things she said. She said, invest in the person, not in the product. That's what she said.
Oh my goodness.
But anyway, so.
Is that how people from Michigan?
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, some.
Apparently.
Yeah, so that was an eye-opener there, but, see, I got too many stories going. I can't remember. But that day, we're gonna see that they doubted if he was even born. They doubted if he was even born blind. And so when something is so painfully obvious, that people try to explain it away, when at the root of it, you don't really wanna believe. And that's really what happened to this poor man.
Andy,
Yep.
I was just thinking how Jesus didn't wait for him to come back and thank him. You know what I'm saying? He did it for all to see, and then apparently he was gone, or I
He did.
mean, we don't know,
He did.
because he didn't know where he was.
Yep.
He said, "Where is?" They asked him where he is, and he said, "I don't know where
He
he is."
said, I don't know.
So Jesus wasn't waiting for a thank you. He didn't hang around to wait for him to
Yeah.
say, "Oh, I can see
And
it."
we're gonna find out at the end of the chapter what happened. We're gonna find out. And you're right, he didn't, you know, Jesus didn't ring a bell and say, hey, I'm gonna do this miracle now, everybody watch. That's not the way he did things. And so he did things in private, he did things in secret, some things he didn't, because he fed the 4,000 and all that, 5,000. But some of these other things, he wasn't out there looking for glory. And, you know, glory, you know, and the admiration, all those other things, yeah, it came to him, but he wasn't out there seeking. He wasn't out there, because I guarantee if anybody else was out there and had these powers, they'd be flaunting it. And Jesus didn't flaunt things. Definitely didn't do that. So he says, like I said, he's having a great day. All he knows is that morning he woke up and couldn't see, and now he can see. So he says, so I went down and washed, and I received my sight. Then they said to him, where is he? And he said, I don't know. He didn't stick around to get all the pats on the back and that's not what he did. He didn't stick around. I don't know where he is. Then they brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to find out if you're really that beggar. We're going to find out if you've been born blind. We're going to take you to the authorities. We're going to get to the bottom of this. They didn't want to just leave well enough alone. They didn't want him spreading Jesus' name and crediting him with the miracle if it really wasn't true. So we're going to take you to the authorities. We're going to basically put you on trial. That's what they did, is they put him on trial. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. I get that it's maybe a couple days later after the miracle. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put clay in my eyes and I washed and I see. Undoubtedly, they already knew the story. They knew why he was there. They're not just going to see somebody without hearing a story first to make it worth their time. They already knew that he claimed Jesus had anointed his eyes and made him wash, and now he's seeing. Well, now, it's okay. They're asking him, repeat your story. Let's get to the bottom of this. Therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. Some of them, it just made sense. They kind of just put the obvious together that there's a miracle. Demons don't do good things for people, so he's got to be a good guy. He's got to be from God. Other people said, well, he did this on the Sabbath, so he can't be. He's breaking that one little law. Never mind what Jesus called him out on, said, if, on the Sabbath, you're not, what happens if your donkey, if your horse or whatever falls into a ditch, and now you got to pull him out? Are you going to do it? Well, of course you're going to do that. You're going to free your animal. Oh, it's the Sabbath. I got to walk away. It's hee-hawing because it's foot stuck, right? No, you're going to somehow get other people, and you're going to do that work on the Sabbath. You're going to pull out that animal. You're going to free that animal. And he's saying, I can't heal a man and make him well? We're talking about an animal versus a person. And you're having a problem with a person, but you'd be fine doing that for an animal. It's the same thing we have today.
Yeah.
You know, let's save the spotted owl and kill humans. And so this one, you know, some of the Pharisees already jumped on and said, well, it's the Sabbath, so he's got to be a bad guy. He wouldn't. Any prophet of God would keep the Sabbath, right? Do you see their thinking? I mean, it's easy to jump on them, but you know, how often do we just pigeonhole people? I just don't. It's kind of an eye opener for me. And so he says, others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said he's a prophet. Is that obvious for you? Yeah, is that obvious? Because he's reading his Bible in the Old Testament and sees, you know, Isaiah, Hezekiah, Jeremiah, all these other prophets, and they're able, Elisha, they're able to do miracles because they're God's prophets. What man among them that wasn't a prophet could have done a miracle? They just put it together. He has to be a prophet. Because I know I couldn't see. I know what he told me to do. I know it was him who did it. Now I can see. He is attributing miracle to the prophet. It's really that easy for him. It's cut and dry. It's black and white. But the Pharisees want to just muddle this. They just want to get in there and they don't want to say that it was Jesus. They don't want to attribute that to him. Well, verse 18 nails it on the head. He says, but the Jews did not believe concerning him. They didn't believe concerning that man standing before them, that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. The evidence is mounting. You have his testimony. You have the testimony of the other people that were around him. And so far, it's batting 1,000 that this man was born blind, and now he can see. And like they did that little thing where they said, okay, walk across the room, and they put a little like obstacle in his way to see if he's going to trip on it, right? Or if he's going to step over it, okay? They know he can see. What they don't know is, was he born blind? And I'm telling you that they don't want to believe this man because he's attributing these things to Jesus, and they don't like Jesus. The second they admit that he can see because of Jesus, now they have to believe. They don't want to believe. They want to do their own thing. They want to cut Jesus out of it, and they want to kill Jesus. So no, of course they don't want to believe. And so this evidence is mounting, and it's painfully obvious to this man that he's a prophet. They don't want to accept that. They don't want to cross that line. So what's he say? Let's just call his parents in. Let's get a third witness. How many witnesses do you need? You just have multiple. The law said you had multiple. And it's verified. No, it doesn't matter. Let's call his parents in. His parents, so they asked them saying, is this your son, who you say, notice that, who you say was born blind, how then does he now see? They're not conceding the fact that he was born blind on any level. You say he was born blind. They asked him a couple questions. His parents answered him. It says his parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. There's your third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever, how many witnesses do you need that he's born blind? But by what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. What does of age mean? Probably that he was more than 30 years old. Jesus didn't start his ministry until 30. That's when you were considered a man and could, in the eyes of other people, that you were of age. So for 30 plus years, this man's been blind. You'd think by now you would have stopped the charade if he really wasn't blind. I think he would. And so he said, ask him and he'll speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he'd be put out of the synagogue. And they can't go back on that word now. They can't just suddenly say, wow, we have a case before us that, Jesus was out there, but now the case is right before them saying, you need to make a decision on if this man was actually healed by Jesus or not. and I work with a bunch of atheists, maybe not a bunch, but some vocal atheists. They're going to have to make a decision, and they've already made that, and they're going to have to continue making it. Whether all the evidence that's stacked in creation's favor is going to be enough for them to keep believing in evolution. The Pharisees had to ask themselves that day, what are we going to do? Are we going to keep believing that this man wasn't born blind, and that Jesus isn't a prophet, or are we going to believe that the testimony of the people that brought him, the man himself, and his parents? And so he said, his parents said these things because they knew what the Jews could do. They would see the parents coming into the synagogue. They would see him coming into the temple, about ready to come in. They would say, no, get out of here. That's what they would do. They'd kick him out. And that's what they feared would happen to them if they sided with their son. The Jews had that power to do that. Verse 23 says, therefore his parents said, he is of age, ask him. They're deferring. And now this man has been exorcised by the people that doubted him, that he was born blind. He's being exorcised by the Jewish leadership. And now his parents are letting him hang out to dry too. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. We know this man is a sinner. We got him all figured out. Just like they had that woman figured out that they plopped down in front of Jesus and said, we need to kill her. They had it all figured out. It's cut and dry. It's a black and white case for them. And they're not willing to accept that he is a prophet and that he is of God. They're just not willing to do it. So he says, give God the glory. We know this man's a sinner. And I love this man's answer. Because now he's hanging with nobody. He's just by himself. He's out there. So no one to fall back on. And even Jesus didn't stick around. We're going to see here in a minute that he does come back. But even the one who could have testified didn't. There's a reason that he didn't. You're going to see here. He answered and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. Because you guys are trying to make this a big deal. He's trying to figure out who did it. And I just know that I can see, and there's been a miracle, and I love life. I love life now. And so for him, it was a cut and dry thing. And they said to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Is he going to change his story? Was he lying the whole time? Nothing wrong with this guy. There's nothing wrong with him. But when you truly don't want to believe something and that's at your base, you're going to stack a bunch of doubt on top of it. So he said, he answered them, I told you already and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? I don't think he was naive enough to think that they really wanted to become his disciples. But he's kind of just poking them a little bit and saying, look, if you really want me to tell you everything that I believe, I can tell you that. And maybe you can believe in faith that he's a prophet or that he's Christ. That was absolutely, that just lit them on fire. He said, then they reviled him and said, you are his disciple, we are Moses' disciple. You identify with him. What's that?
It's like a bunch of kindergartners.
It is. It is. They were so angry, and this anger is coming out. And they said, you identify with Jesus, we identify with Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. We don't even know where he's from, but we know that God spoke to Moses. The man answered and said to them, why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he's from. Yet he has opened my eyes. I said, get to know him. He's doing good works. Get to know him. Let's call him in here. Let's ask him. Let's find out more about him. So the man answered and said to them, why, this is a marvelous thing. Verse 31, now we know that God does not hear sinners. Now this is interesting that he's pleading with them. They're pleading with him, give God the glory and deny it. And he's saying, no, we know what God doesn't hear sinners. We know that somebody that's not walking with God isn't going to be able to do miracles. Okay? The prophets, and that was their pattern, that the prophets were close to God and they were able to do miracles because they were seeking the things of God. That's kind of a no-brainer. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. Never heard of that miracle before. If this man were not from God, this is his logic. We have to wrap our minds around his logic. It's not hard to do. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And he's pleading with the leadership. Don't you understand this? Isn't this what you believe? This is Law 101. This is Old Testament 101. They answered and said to him, you were completely born in sins. There it is. That's why the disciples thought that he could have been responsible for his blindness in the womb. You were born in sins. Were they born in sins? No, you were born in sins. And you're teaching us. They kicked him out. They had that power over him, didn't they? They had the power to kick him out of the synagogue. They had the power to end his worship as a Jewish man. They had that power. And they exercised that power that day. The one thing he might have been afraid of, they did. The one thing his parents were afraid of, they did. The story doesn't end there, though. That's what I love about this. We talked about this a second earlier. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. Now comes Jesus again. It's been since verse 7 that he said anything. He let this man go through this. And now he's back. He says, Jesus heard they had cast him out, and when he had found him, Jesus went seeking for him, seeking him out. He said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? You know, maybe this man had to go through these things to come to this point of real appreciation, not just for the miracle, but his eyes were opened, excuse the pun, to the Jewish leadership and what they were really all about. And now, you can see clearer that they're not really on his side. They're not really interested in him as a person. They're interested in using him to discredit Jesus. And Jesus is interested in him. There's the difference. They wanted to kill that woman that day. They weren't interested in her body. They weren't interested in her soul. They weren't interested in her spirit. They were interested in killing her and just doing away with her. But Jesus is interested in her, us. Jesus is interested in that man that day. So he says, do you believe in the Son of God? He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe him? I got nobody else. My parents threw me to the wolves. My friends, they denied who I was. The Pharisees kicked me out of the synagogue. I need to believe in something. I need to believe in you, Lord. He wasn't at the end of his rope just after he was healed, was he? In fact, life was looking up. Thanks. See you later. Now, his life had a huge change of events. Sometimes it takes us to not, to see a miracle, and a miracle happens to us, and we don't really appreciate it, do we? Until it's gone. And then we can turn around and say, Lord, I need you. I got nobody. I need you. And Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you. That's Jesus. That's the Christ. You've already talked to him. He's saying it's me. Then he said, Lord, I believe. He worshipped him. It dawned on him that that's everything. Everything fell into place at that moment for him. He said, I believe. And Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world that those who do not see may see. So Christ is wrapping up all of these events. And he's putting it together for this man. They're saying, you can see because you were blind. And the Pharisees, they think they can see, but really they're blind. So he says that those who do not see may see. such as this man, and that those who see may be made blind. And some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see.' Therefore your sin remains." And so Jesus was calling people in his ministry to see that they didn't see, to see that they needed to be humbled and humiliated like this man was in order for the light to turn on and say, "I don't really understand." What did this man say? He says, "Who is he that I may believe in?" Do you really think the Pharisees would have come to that? No, they said, "We can teach you who he is. We know who he is. And we can teach you about God." Meanwhile, they don't understand about God. They didn't know about him. And that's what chapter 8 was mostly about, was that they didn't know about Jesus. They didn't know about God. So they're gonna stumble on God, they're gonna stumble on Jesus. So Jesus is saying, for the people who think they have it all figured out, I got another thing coming. You have another thing coming. For the people who know they don't have it figured out, that's where Christ fills in missing pieces.
Well, it was just crossing my mind too, up until Jesus came, the Pharisees, they were, and the temple and whatnot, they were Israel's, I guess, way to God. They were his envoys, for lack of a better word. Then this man, and they held all the power because of that. We see that they held who could worship, when they could worship. And then you see this man come, or they see this man come who he's not afraid of him. He's not, you see the blind man's parents, they didn't want to get kicked out of the synagogue. This man, he doesn't care if he's kicked out of the synagogue. He's not only claiming God, but he's claiming to be God's son and doing all these miracles and the power that would take away from the Pharisees. I think that was a big problem for him. Not only that, but also if the Pharisees admitted that Jesus was who he said he was, then, and Jesus has so many, I guess, conflicts with them. The Pharisees have to turn around and look at themselves and see where all they're going wrong and where they've been going wrong for however many years that they've had been around. They have to hold themselves accountable for that. Those things that they held as being special, I guess, and all that power, that's all gone. As soon as they admit that Jesus is who he says he is.
Right. And a lot of them didn't want to take that leap. And it reminds me of when you were talking about, in school, I don't care what school you go to, what era that time frame you went to school in, there's always bullies, right? There's always bullies. And what I liked about it was bullies in my grade. There's not a lot of bullies. If you look at the little flow chart, you're going to have bully at the top, and it's going to fan down. But you have a bully, right? I like when a new kid comes on, here's a new kid of the class. And he puts the bully in his place because he's tougher. And he just doesn't know that's the bully. You don't mess with him. No, he's calling him out. He's joking with him. He's teasing him. You don't really want to do that. I liked that. I loved that, in fact.
That was you.
That was me, yeah. Well.
The new kid or the bully?
We'll leave that up to your imagination. But no, it's just one of those things where it's like, here, you had the Pharisees being the bullies of the people, and then you had someone else come in, like Jesus, and he was the only one that would stick up to him. And he stood up to him time and time and time again. These people are like, we're not messing with them. We're going to get kicked out of the synagogue. Jesus says, no. It is what it is. And after that, they kicked him out. He went to them. He went to that man and found him. Didn't care that Pharisees were standing right there listening to him say that they were blind. Didn't care in Matthew 23 when Jesus goes on for half a chapter about exposing who the Pharisees were. Didn't care that they were listening to that message. Didn't care who he might offend. And so Jesus was that person to come in and edge out the bully and say, you can come follow me, and I'll teach you really what the law was supposed to be about. And so Jesus, in demonstrating how he dealt with these people and these this, the woman in chapter 8, this man in chapter 9 demonstrated such a difference of dealing with these people, of how you treat people is so different the way he did it than the way the leadership was doing it. No wonder it says he came to fulfill the law. No one else could have fulfilled the law. The law needed to be completed. It ran its course, it was done. It showed man that you can't measure up. Interwoven in that is mercy and truth and love. And he came to fulfill those things in his bodily presence. His demeanor, his character, his actions, his words, they all came to fulfill that law. The law was perfect, but no man could possibly keep it. How can we keep it? By forgiving each other, by having mercy on each other, by dealing with each other in love. Does it sound like what Jesus did as people? See, he fulfilled the law. He didn't come just to bring a bigger hammer down than the Pharisees brought. He came to show that it was about love and mercy. So that's why I love reading about these stories. This has been an eye-opener for me that, it's just black and white for me, that the contrast between the way these two people were treated by the leadership versus Jesus. So it's not just there for an accident. It's there for us to learn. It's there for us to demonstrate it too.
Well, I think God used these incidents. There had to be, Jesus saw the big picture. He knew that there had to be hate against him. It had to be building up to the point of death. He knew that that was the final thing that he'd have to do. So it has to be building up those 3 years to get it to that point to where they kill him.
Remember that we studied this when he was down in Galilee. The very first person that he, or not first person he healed, but early on in his ministry, he healed that man. I think he had a withered hand on the Sabbath. They wanted to kill him for that. I mean, it wasn't like he was just like, he had just started his ministry and he already was, they were already wanted to kill him for one thing. It didn't take long. So, he's talking about it being built up, maybe that's where it started and just got worse. But it didn't take much for them to say this is our punishment.
And what I like about this too is that this guy has spunk. And you don't see this often in the New Testament, people standing up to the Pharisees like this. And he had a little spirit in him. He had a little, little pushback for him, which you normally don't see. I mean, his own parents were cowering to the Pharisees, and sort of, as you said, let him out to dry, let him out there by himself. But he had some spunk. We don't hear about this man ever again. We assume that he followed. We don't know if something caught up to him at some point and he fell away, or the freedom of his newfound eyesight, led him into other things.
Yeah.
But for that moment and for this chapter, he had a little chutzpah. He was able to sort of push back on him. And as you said, in the end, he was all by himself. And so who shows up when he's all by himself? Jesus. To sort of reassure him that, hey, this is all part of God's will, that you were blind from birth to come to this moment. It's fascinating to see people stand up to the leadership of the time, and really, they have that in common. Jesus and him had that in common. That maybe he chose this blind person from birth versus the other blind people from birth, because he knew that he would have that pushback to him. But yeah, that's why I love this chapter, because he really kind of like, hey, I'll look here. Maybe you guys should follow him too.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Why do you keep asking?
I love that question. Do you also want to be his disciples?
Yeah. Do you also want to be his disciples?
Yeah, that's something. Well, next week we're going to look at Jesus as the true shepherd, chapter 10. Good shepherd. All right. Nothing else. Let's go to dismiss. Dear Father, we do give our